Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. Now, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people, like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And tonight I've got a treat for you. We've got Dr. Martin Donahoe, who's been on the show 36,000 times. No, probably 6 or 7 times through the years, because he's such an interesting and delightful human being personally, and with his knowledge and his fine thinking and logic and that sort of thing. And the first half of the show, we're going to talk about who he is and where his roots are from, since you've heard a number of times how he is personally and how he came about. But he's going to talk about his mom and his parents and like that, to give you a little more depth about who he is and where he came from. And at the opening of the second half of the show, we will indeed have his mom and another surprise guest. He's going to introduce them to you. But we're going to open the show because the title of the show, The Kind of World We Want for Our Children. So Dr. Donahoe was wanting to give you a broader perspective about what we mean by world. And you'll see what I mean in a minute when he talks about these slides before we start talking to each other. Shall we start that? You ready to say something,
Let's
Dr. Donahoe?
Yes.
How you feeling?
No, I am grateful for that kind introduction. It sounds like my publicist, if I had one, wrote it. So these are some slides that I like to use when I'm giving lectures to students. And it gives us some perspective on how incredibly unique we are and how small we are, and yet how precious life is and how really big we can be in each other's eyes. So the Earth spins at a little over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, and between 7 and 8 and 900 miles per hour at mid-latitudes. Our planet rotates around the sun at 18.5 miles per second, and our solar system orbits the center of the Milky Way galaxy at 137 miles per second. Still, one rotation takes 225 million years. When you think about these numbers, it's really true that we will never pass this way again. We are constantly on the move. Our sun is one of hundreds of billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy, and the Milky Way is one of over 100 billion galaxies in the known universe. And indeed, the universe may be one of an infinite number of universes.
Where are the pictures?
So, these are some pictures to give you an idea of size. You see the two major gaseous planets, Jupiter and Saturn, and the Earth is small in the lower left-hand corner. And next, we're transitioning up to the sun. You can see the relative size of Jupiter and the Earth is becoming smaller. And then
we're disappearing.
Here, looking at some nearby stars, Sirius is the dog star that sits just to the back end of Orion the Hunter, the Sun. The Earth is invisible at this scale, and Jupiter is just about 1 pixel in size. Next slide. Here we've gone to some even bigger stars, and here the Sun is just 1 pixel, and Jupiter and of course the Earth are invisible. Next slide. And this is our home. This is the famous Earthrise shot from the Apollo astronauts as they orbited the moon. And another perspective in the next slide. This is the Voyager spacecraft, which turned its cameras around to take a picture of the Earth-Moon system through Saturn's rings. And there you can really get a sense of not only how tiny we are, but how really alone we are in the universe. Everything that we love, everything that has ever been historically, every battle that's ever been fought, every family that's ever been created, every argument that's ever been had, every bit of love that's been shared has all taken place on this precious little pale blue dot. And we need to take care of that. We need to take care of that for ourselves, but more importantly for our children and for the next generation and many generations to come. So I hope this gives some perspective on how isolated we are and how small, and how yet, in what we'll talk about the rest of the show, how important it is that we treat each other well and create the kind of world that will be sustainable.
Very, very, very well said, yes. Now, we agreed, instead of quizzing you about your childhood and your history, I'm going to talk about who I am and where I came from in a few words, and then we'll hear you talk about your parentage and that kind of stuff. I think I've read this a couple of times in the past, but it's been a long time. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, of red, white, and black Roman Catholic parentage on December 26, 1928. Today, I am a-religious and accepting of all others. I'm a retired PhD clinical psychologist and present-day television broadcast journalist, as you're watching right now. I am the 12th of 12 children, am married, and am the father of 5 daughters by a first marriage. Politically, I am a progressive populist activist. Try to saying that fast. Still learning how to live lovingly, That's what it's all about. A few of my heroes include Jesus, Gandhi, MLK, and any other fellow human who is currently living lovingly today. And my slogan of the month is, above all else, be nice. Your turn. Can I call you Martin or Dr. Donahoe?
No, Martin is fine.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you are a true polymath. And I love our discussions, not just on the show, but that we've had off the show. And I always go away feeling like I've learned at least 5 different things and have at least 1 or 2 different perspectives on life. You're an incredible font of wisdom. And I hope that I age as well as you do. I'm not going to divulge your age, but Don is
like fine wine.
He is. It's incredible.
Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so my background. So my parents met, and it's kind of a cute story. My mom was an opera singer in Canada, and she moved to Los Angeles. And my father went to the University of Sydney and then got scholarships to both Harvard and Cambridge, and took the scholarship to Cambridge and left under rather tragic circumstances. His mother was dying, his sister was dying. He didn't want to leave. He got on the boat and he heard that his mother was so relieved despite all the tears, and that the first thing she said when the boat got out of sight was, "Thank God, I'm so glad that he left." Because she cared about him that much and wanted him to build his career. And I think he had
left from where?
From Sydney, Australia.
Yes.
To go to England. And so when he was finished at Cambridge, he came to LA, and he was teaching at USC at the time.
University of Southern California.
Yes, correct. I try not to say it since I went to UCLA and there are arch rivals. So
but there are other people out there.
There are. If you have
Pardon my interrupting.
All due respect to the Trojans. So they had a mutual friend, and my mother was commenting how she wasn't meeting very many people and would like to have a nice conversation. And my dad said, "I really miss the international environment of Cambridge. I could sit down with a Pakistani and someone from Canada and someone from India at the same meal, and we'd talk about global politics and so on." And she said, "I have just the girl for you." So she set up a dinner on Valentine's Day, had the 2 of them over at her house. My mom wore a beautiful dress with literally a heart pinned to her sleeve.
Oh, heart on her sleeve.
And at one point in the meal, my dad noticed there was a television. And this was back in the late 1950s. And Australia was always about 20 years behind the US in that period, socioculturally. And he looked at me and he said, "Boy, if I knew someone who had a television, I'd be on their doorstep every other night." And this was on a Friday, and on Monday, my mom bought a television. And so the rest is history. And they got married. They had me. They had my 2 brothers, both of whom married very well. They have wonderful wives. They each have 2 kids. They're both highly accomplished, as are their spouses. And their children are my niece and 3 nephews who are delightful. And that's how I came to be. And going back to this question of our uniqueness and perhaps insignificance, when you think of all the sperm and all the eggs and all the generations that have gone through and against incredible odds just for me to be here, for me, if you realize that, you just want to celebrate every second you have and realize how incredible it is that you're alive. And what are you going to do, as Mary Oliver said, what will you do with your one precious life?
What are you doing with your one precious life?
Well, right now, I'm a lucky individual. I have an older daughter who's out on her own now, whom I adopted as a teenager. And I am now the single dad and sole parent to an incredibly delightful 18-month-old little toddler girl.
Madeline?
And, Madeline. And I tell
and
you,
she is indeed what he said.
The moment Madeline was born, I realized that I looked at her and I just said, this is the rest of my life. This is it. And I've never been happier.
I can tell.
So,
because I've known you, of course,
that's,
even before Madeline.
And that's where it is. And if I can be half the parents my mom and dad were, my dad passed away in 1989.
That's a while ago, huh?
It is, although I still think of him every day, especially when I'm parenting and try to think to myself, what would my dad do? The sacrifices that my parents made for my brothers and me, the love that they showed us, the commitment, if I can be half the parents they were, I'll consider myself a success.
Yeah, okay. So the end result is what you are today and what you're about in your life. And since I've had you on the show a number of times, and we're also personal friends, then we've talked about all sorts of things. And I was just telling my director on the way here tonight, I says, I finally found something about Dr. Donahoe that we had a difference on. But for a while I was concerned that we never had a fight about anything. But I said, and I'm so glad, on the other hand, that I found something that we had some difference on, and it was about the police versus the shooting and that sort of a thing. We went back and forth on that for some time, the last time I was at your house for lunch. And I appreciate that we are indeed not from the same gene pool, and we have our own individual thoughts, and we respect each other's views, because I admire you and respect you so much for what I know about you, and I always look forward, for a number of reasons, to us getting together, whether it's in the context of a show or just visiting, having fun, and saying hello to Maddie.
Well, and I should clarify, the difference actually was quite minor. I've been lecturing about race and healthcare and the various socioeconomic injustices that are perpetrated on African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, going back to the era of Columbus, for decades, and in fact have an entire slideshow on my website discussing the criminal justice system and the way that that racial and ethnic minorities in this country have been treated. And there are incredible injustices in prosecution and sentencing, in how the drug war has been carried out, in the how the death penalty has been used against African Americans versus against whites. And I think our only difference really related to which cases were the ones that became a flashpoint for the justifiable anger of African Americans regarding how they've been treated by the police in so many ways in the United States. And it related to the Ferguson case and the pathologist report. And there was enough doubt raised in my mind, specifically looking at the crime that was committed prior in the liquor store to the shooting, and the way the pathologist report was written, that the police officer in the situation may have been justified in the shooting. Now, I don't know enough, but it raised a reasonable doubt, and my only disagreement was there are so many other cases all the time, and I would like to have seen people on the streets protesting that long before this. But that being said, you look at the cases like New York and Baltimore, and you've just gotta wake up, if you haven't woken up to this, and say, there is something just fundamentally unjust, and that goes against everything that we always say America stands for. and maybe stand back and think to say, every time we have to add that phrase, well, this is not what America stands for, maybe history has shown us that that is what America stands for, and maybe we need to change that.
Interesting, what America stands for and what America does, America's reality.
Right, that's better stated, yeah. And so
how did you get to think and feel the way that you do? You're kind of strange. You look like plain old American white bread, but yet you sound part black. Are you sure you don't have a black heart?
Well, my father's Australian. My mom is actually of Ukrainian parentage, and her parents were immigrants in the pre-Stalin era to Canada. The story of the streets are paved with gold and so on. And when I grew up, I was tiny. I skipped a grade somewhere between second and third grade. I just showed up for class one day, and there were new classmates, and I later discovered that I'd been put ahead.
Why'd they do that? Put you ahead?
I don't know, just to challenge me
I know why.
more.
You got a brain.
Well, there was, yeah. So so throughout, I think I graduated high school and I was something like 5'6" and 115 pounds, and I was always small. I was picked on. The first day of junior high, I showed up. My dad thought this was a nice ceremony. He gave me the briefcase that he carried to the Christian Brothers school that he went to in Australia, and it was a big father-son moment. He passed it down to me, so I hopped on my Schwinn bike wearing my Toughskins, which were probably colored magenta, and I know I had a calculator on my belt. I had the pocket protector. I was carrying the briefcase, and within 30 minutes of arriving at 7th grade, at a Catholic school no less, I found myself thrown into the trash can after my briefcase, and that set up 6 years of being mercilessly bullied. And so I think I've always identified with outsiders as a result of that. I ended up growing later, obviously, but that sense of wanting to fight for the underdog and helping to lend my voice to those who may not have access to speaking with someone like yourself and bringing their issues to the fore.
How long did it take you to learn to fight back?
I don't think I've ever really fought back.
I guess that's your answer.
No. I kind of don't think, unless you're doing something like protecting your child. I think if someone was attacking Maddie, I would fight back mercilessly. Of course. But
are you a pacifist?
Fundamentally, yes.
Okay, I don't think I am. We're Gandhian.
Explain more.
In that, probably like what you said, if someone were attacking my daughter or somebody, and I'm not sure a pacifist would be different. Either he or she would fight back too. So let's pass on that. I don't have an adequate answer for you.
I don't know if there is an adequate answer to some of the really tough moral and ethical questions that we face. But that's one of the nice things about the fact that we're able to communicate, and what sets us, well, it doesn't set us apart from many species, since dolphins and birds and chimpanzees and others have their own form of language.
And bonobos.
Of course.
Those are my favorite species.
They are.
Did you know that one of my best crew people and post-production person, Roger, is I call him Bonobo as a nickname because he has a personality like a bonobo, just as nice and caring and loving. Thank you, Roger. You can't see him, but so let's continue on.
Sure.
So that's a little bit about your mom and dad and how they came together, and the end result is you and your brothers. Yeah.
I think you wanted to talk about communication and the lack of face-to-face.
Well, we're going to take a break now and come back and talk about later on.
Whatever you'd like. You're the boss.
Because we want more time to talk about other stuff, huh?
Sure.
Can we take an early break, Mr. E? All right. So we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. And tonight we're talking about the kind of world we want for our children. In the first half, Dr. Donna Ho, our primary guest, has talked about his mom and his dad and his parentage and what their life was like from his memory. And now after the break, we're going to be talking about other subjects. And Maddie wants to say something. Hello. She's so precious. Yeah.
So this is Madeline, almost 18 months old, and this is my mom, Annette, Madeline's grandma. And as I mentioned, my father is deceased, and Grandma has been a tremendous help with Maddie. And this is my boss. Can you wave to the camera, sweetheart? Hi. Come on, Professor. Here you go. You're on TV. Whoa.
But you should have been here when he was talking about you. Oh, the things he said about you.
Oh, your ears burning, sweetheart. Looky here. Whoa. Whoa. Oh, yeah.
We got a laugh out of it.
Whoa.
So you better have fun right now because you won't be on again for another 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
Periodic guest.
That's right. She has been on before. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We got to get you an agent, Maddie. You're going to... That's right. You're going to support me in my old age. Okay. Well, I think we have to get back to business.
Okay.
So, Mom, if you don't mind taking Mads for a walk.
I'll take her for a walk.
Here you go, Maddie.
Her walk.
Oh.
Thank you for coming.
It's just lovely, and Martin is so happy to be here. And his pride and joy is here, and family is his pride and joy.
Oh.
She doesn't want to leave, or she wants to leave.
Oh, sweetheart. I know. I'm going to see you
go
very
for a walk
soon.
again, okay?
Yeah.
Gotta go for a walk.
I'm going to see you very soon. I
Thank
love you,
you.
sweetheart. Maddie, I love you.
We'd never know it.
She's so awesome.
Of course she is. So we had a bunch of questions and to choose from. You submitted some to me, and I submitted some back to you. And I think we've narrowed it down to where we won't need 4 hours to cover all of them. But hopefully we got it down to a number where we can cover them in the remaining 30, 35 minutes we have to talk about things.
Sure.
We narrowed them down to 3 categories. The overuse of non-face-to-face communicating in our population particularly, and it's worldwide apparently, the overuse of non-face-to-face communicating. You want to talk about that?
Sure, and I'm not sure I'd call it communicating.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to sound like the kind of cranky old man here, but I remember growing up.
I know what those are like.
know, but I'm 52, so I go back to the eras where there was a milkman who would deliver milk bottles to your porch. And I remember when we wanted to play with a friend, there was a wall phone, and we'd call them, and if nobody answered, we'd call them later and see what they wanted to do. There were no answering machines. There was just one phone in the house, which led to a little embarrassment because I had a crush on a young lady when I was in 8th grade, and I had to call her to ask her to a dance, and I was mortified because I had to do it in the kitchen with everybody listening. So,
There's your face-to-face.
Right. But I think that the advent of technology, the internet, cell phones, tablets, and smartphones, I think has been good in some ways. It's in many ways, it's actually brought the world together and allowed people to communicate. And there I really do mean communicate, like share ideas between countries, people of different political persuasions. It's easier to keep up with the news. It's easier to become involved in a protest. On the other hand, I speak as a bit of a neo-Luddite. I have a 3G flip phone. I don't text, I don't twit blog or FaceSpace or Ridiggity Dog or InstaChat. Well, I think the reason I don't is that I see so many people whose world has been compressed to a little 2x4-inch screen that they're spending so much time looking at, and they're going to get repetitive stress injuries from typing with their little fingers to get messages in there. And so much of texting and twit blogging is just, it's just so banal. I read that the average high school student sends and receives 88 texts per day, which means to me either they're incredibly narcissistic and think that what they're doing is so important that they need to announce it to other people, or they have a need to communicate even the most mundane things that happen to them, and rather than actually living their life and having sit-down face-to-face discussions with people and meeting new people, we're all sitting there absorbed in our phones. I'm a single guy, so I've always got my sort of eyes out to meet people, and I'll go to the gym, for instance, and almost everybody, going back to the era before Walkman, people would actually talk in the gym. You go up and meet people and talk to them. Nowadays, you can't. Everybody's got their headphones in. The people who don't are sitting there going like this, the same thing on the subway, the same thing pretty much wherever you go. And I think in many ways, we've just entered our own little boxes, and there's so much to see and do out in the real world that one of the things I want to instill in Madeline is get out there and do it. See nature and fall in love with nature and fall in love with people.
So as time has gone by, communicating means something different now than it did 100 years ago.
I think so.
Communicating now, we're talking in terms of something from our brain and our intellect rather than experiencing each other. The fundamental meaning for communicating means communicating, being with you and hearing and seeing and experiencing you, and vice versa, as it was not too many years ago. And that's missing, and it's serious.
And you go back to before I was around, so I imagine in the days of the telegraph,
Semaphore.
But what was it like when you were a child? I imagine it was even different than when I was a child in terms of
I think about in New Orleans, in the Ninth Ward in the early 30s when I was a child. And we, particularly in summer, we sat around under the trees outside and had dinner and bread pudding and all that kind of stuff. And we looked at each other and we talked to each other, and when guests were in the house, it was there. The point is we were in each other's presence, in each other's physical presence. And there's a connection more important than the connection we can have by just looking and seeing, it's experiencing each other. I'm repeating myself, I know, but that's missing. And I have a fun thing. My nickname is Friendly. Friendly Don. My email address is friendlydon@yahoo.com. My license plate is Friendly because being friendly is such a joy, and I'm enjoying it more and more in my everyday experiencing. When I go into the gym, people are looking around, I'm looking for them, they're looking for me because we're going to just say hello. And I make my rounds in some point in time during the day, and sometimes they're now making their rounds to contact with me. And even if we spend 20 seconds looking at each other and talking, it's such a feeling. And fundamentally, my okayness is contingent on my being able to experience the joy of experiencing you. I got on my rant.
No, I'm 100% with you. And we were talking at the break about so-called primitive cultures.
Okay.
And how there's a rich tradition of storytelling, and I think we've lost that. I really enjoy reading with Maddie, and it's something I hope that we continue to do for many years, reading stories to each other when she's able to say more than blah, blah, blah. She actually has a few words beyond that. So.
What are they?
But,
Dada?
Dada, Daddy. She said her own name for the first time the other day. She said Maddie. She says no a lot.
Oh, yes.
And it doesn't always mean no, though. It's interesting. She's just starting to learn yes. But in the early days, no was just this word that could be used to pretty much say anything. But now she's getting the idea of no, especially when combined with means no, I don't want that. But the best words that she says, and she says them all the time, and it's such an endearing stage, and I think I have the feeling that all parents do when you say you just don't want this to end, is anytime she sees something new or amazing, she says, whoa, wow. And the things that I think are so mundane, I think, oh yeah, that's just, she's, wow.
Spontaneously out of her.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And fortunately, I've caught some of them on video, so I can always enjoy them.
What are we going to do about people so involved in, I think of the cell phones primarily, and those kinds of devices where. And Ellery, our director, was just talking about when he goes on public transit sometimes, and everybody, 90-some% of the people on that bus or streetcar has got some device. And they're in the physical presence of a fellow human being that they can really connect with and communicate with. That's something horrible. I think it doesn't speak well for survival of humanity, and I'm oftentimes grandiose, and perhaps this time I am. But I think it's that important.
Well, it is. It's important to build communities, and it's important because relationship nourish us. And we're turning off the opportunity to develop new relationships. I read a sociological study once that said the average human being can only really keep track of 150 people. So when I hear that somebody's got 500 friends on their Instagram or followers on their Instagram page or 2,000 Facebook friends, you have to ask yourself, maybe we've forgotten what the definition of friend is. But to build community, we need to talk to each other. We need to go back to an era where we knew our neighbors, where we'd get together. I remember growing up, we'd have on July 4th, it would be a block party, and set off fireworks, and the whole neighborhood would come. It was nice.
Mm-hmm. So what are we going to do about what people are doing, just talking about here in America at least, and hooked on and occupied by this artificial device rather than visiting with each other? What are we going to do about that collectively?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with how we raise our children. And hopefully, as people, it's interesting. The studies that look at happiness, and there are scales to look at this,
sure.
and going back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, have found that if anything, in the United States at least, we're less happy than we were then.
Yes.
And definitely we have fewer people that we can say are close friends and confidants, people with whom we would entrust our deepest secrets or turn to in case of emergency.
And why is that?
I think it's because of this disconnectedness through the various forms of technology that again, there are many ways that they can unite us, but I think that they're overused. And the problem too is I think that it isolates us and prevents us from confronting some of the major social justice issues that if we're going to fix this world, we need to have started working on yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you are now magically the President of the United States. What will you do about the situation we're talking about now?
That is magical, because I would never be elected, nor would I want such a job. But I think if I were to look at the major issues confronting the world today, one of them is the status of women.
Okay.
And by that I mean the social, the political, the legal, the ethical marginalization of women.
In the world.
In the world. The fact that women do 2/3 of the world's work and hold less than 10% of seats in all legislative bodies. They only own about 10% of the world's wealth and only 1% of the world's property. And I think that if we were to educate young girls, that we would not only have more women in positions of power, which I think would be good for the planet, a little less testosterone, but we would make it that women would be able to delay pregnancy. We'd have fewer unwanted pregnancies. We'd have later marriages. We'd have more solid families. And so I think that education is the key, at least one of them, to reproductive rights. But then, of course, the access to all forms of reproductive health care worldwide. And so many women in the world today do not have information about birth control, do not have access to it, do not have access to termination services or abortion. And as the father of 2 women, that's incredibly important to me. The other issues, I think, are environmental preservation and the fact that we're living in the largest mass extinction since the time of the dinosaurs.
So gender discrimination worldwide. This is what exists now on the face of the earth.
Right.
And how did we get to this point where there's such gender differences?
I think that probably goes back to the advent of agriculture 10,000 or so years ago, and the fact that human communities, which were much more egalitarian prior to that as hunter-gatherers, were able to settle in communities, which led to the rise of a class-based system. So you would have a ruling class, a warrior class, which was often men, who, because of the testosterone and the greater muscular build and ability to hurl weapons and beat people with clubs, became part of the warrior class that allied itself with those who had more possessions and were in authority. And I think as a consequence, that egalitarian nature of society changed in such a way that you had a ruling class of males who were often in cahoots with the military class of males and were able to subjugate women. And this is not just worldwide, this is a problem in the United States, where women are still making 77, 78% on the dollar, which is what they made 30, 40 years ago. We've made no progress.
How are we going to change that in America?
I'd like to think so.
How can we do that?
I think part of that has to be done by women themselves, and an uprising. And I don't think, for instance, women know what it was like in the pre-Roe v. Wade era, young women today, to not have availability of abortion on demand. I think it's going to be up to us creating a better public school system that is more egalitarian, so that the quality of the public schools is the same across all neighborhoods.
But we're privatizing the public school systems now, aren't we?
Well, I think turning over something like education, which is a public good, to corporations whose reason for being, and in fact whose charter demands that they make money, and that's their top priority, is to make money for their shareholders. I think that's an incredible mistake. That's like privatizing the fire department. And if I have a fire at my place and I call and they say, well, we'll have to see if this fire is covered because it turns out that you had a pre-existing condition of a wooden deck and it looks like you missed your last payment on your fire insurance, so we're not going to come out. And then my neighbor next door to me, he's going to say, well, please come out because my house is about to burn. And they say, well, there's nothing wrong with you. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
Are you against privatization?
That's a good question. I think it's a very complicated question that's probably for another time because it deals with issues like private property and ownership of certain things. And I'm not against certain types of privatization nor of competition. But the type of competition that's engendered by our corporate plutocracy is the kind that rats and mice live under. And we're better than that as human beings.
Can you imagine what it would be like to be a female, a woman in the workplace today in America? And to know as much as you know now.
Well, I would be angry. I'd have a justifiable anger. I'd know that I'd be caught in that dilemma of, do I defer parenting to have a child? I don't think there's enough value placed on motherhood. I think it's commonly said that it takes a village, but it does take a village. And that village is not only to help actually raise the child, but to provide support for a woman in the workplace so that she can not only advance her career, but also take care of her children. And this is incredibly important to me because I being a single dad, a sole parent, I have, fortunately, my mom and the rest of my family who helps. I have wonderful nannies, and yet I spend most of my free time raising Madeline, and it's a joy. But I'm able to do that because I work part-time, I'm a physician, I make enough money to be able to do that. Most people don't have that kind of support and are struggling, and I don't think we respect enough the value of parenting in this country.
Will legislation help?
Yes, absolutely. Paid sick time off for a start, which not only is a just thing to do and is going to have more effect on the poor and on women because they're the primary caretakers, just because that's the way society is, but is also an important public health measure because you don't want people coming to work when they're sick and they're going to take out 5 other workers by passing along their infection. And yet it's been such a struggle to try to get bills passed that allow for paid time off.
Why is that? The people who make the bills and pass the bills,
Well,
they're not doing that?
We don't have a, you know this stuff.
Of course I know it. I want the viewers to hear you say it.
We don't have a truly representative legislature or court system in this country.
Okay.
Yeah, the average income of members of Congress is well over $1 million. Every member of the Supreme Court is a millionaire. I don't think that they can connect with the problems of real people. And because of a corrupt system that relies on private money, often just one or two donors, like the Koch brothers, those individuals can have such an outsized say in who gets elected and in driving policy in this country, actually just writing bills, which lobbyists will do and hand them off.
Lobbyists, that's a terrible word.
It is. It's.
Are you against lobbyists?
I think that in the United States, it's important for every issue to be aired and for those who don't have a voice to be allowed to come together and have their voice heard. Yeah. And that might involve using a lobbyist to make your voice heard. The problem is lobbies for the corporations, lobbies for the vested, the powerful money-making class in this country have such an outsized lobbying budget and so many more lobbyists, orders of magnitude more than those who represent women, labor, the retired, that it's not even a fair playing field. So I think there needs to be tremendous limits placed on the number of lobbyists, their access to representatives, the amount of money that they can spend on various things, and I think we need to have more free and open elections, debates, true debates, and we need better journalists. I'm really, now I'm on my rant. So,
I love it. So then you would be in favor of a third party or some alternative to the Democrats and Republicans? Are you a supporter of Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton?
I think Sanders is wonderful. I find it very hard to support Clinton, whom I think is a right centrist and whom, when I listen to her speak, I don't get a sense of honesty and passion. It's more one of self-promotion. I would rather see Elizabeth Warren running, for instance, because I think she understands the nature of the financial system in this country and has tried against Sisyphean odds to change that system. I love Sanders. I love that he's plain spoken, that he's honest, that he knows the issues well. He's a smart guy, and he cares about everybody. He cares about the little guys.
He's got a flaw.
And?
He does not come out strongly against Netanyahu and the Israeli lobby in our country. That's his one flaw that I
agreed. And I think you're right, and I hadn't thought about that. I think that's, again, a whole nother issue, but I think that the fact that the Palestinians are essentially living in what is the world's largest open-air prison,
yes,
and subjected to numerous human rights abuses. And I'll say this with the caveat that I've talked about the role of physicians in the Holocaust and human subject experimentation and all those tremendous abuses. So this has nothing to do with being anti-Semitic, which I'm afraid I've heard from some people. Don't send letters. This has nothing to do with that. This is a human rights issue. And I think that if there ever is to be peace in the Middle East, there has to be a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and one that recognizes the inherent dignity and human rights of the Palestinians and of the Israelis, and their right to live under equitable socioeconomic circumstances in peace.
And they did for some time. And our time is running out, so we better move on to something else.
Okay.
We're talking about globally. Oh my gosh. War and peace.
Whew.
There's one you can answer in about 5 seconds.
Right. War bad, peace good. Why don't we have a Department of Peace? Why are we in arrears on our UN dues? Why have we invaded so many countries and set up military bases in so many countries around the world?
Great questions. What's your answer?
Because I don't think that the U.S. lives militarily by the ideals enshrined in our Constitution.
Okay.
I mean, the Constitution is a wonderful document. It does have some flaws.
Of course.
But I think that it's so grossly been misappropriated by those with vested interests. And you and I both know that many of the military ventures that have taken place over the last century have been under the auspices of trying to create peaceful democratic societies, but really are driven by corporate interests. Sometimes the interests of just
Money,
a single corporation,
class
looking
warfare.
at Central America, for instance, and class warfare.
Department of Peace, you want to say a few words about that or not? Or
I
should we
would
move on?
like to see that. I would like to see more money spent on how we can create peace in the world. People keep saying in the news, why is it that everyone hates America? Why do terrorists want to kill us? I think it's that they don't hate Americans per se. I think when they meet Americans, and I'm not only an American citizen, but an Australian-Canadian citizen due to my fortunate parenting that I mentioned, but I don't think they hate Americans. I think they hate what our military-industrial complex has done. And why is it that we're the world's largest arms dealer and sending arms to countries that often end up becoming enemies or invading our allies or using them to carry out terrorist activities?
Why is that?
Because the military-industrial complex is a very well-connected lobby in Washington.
And they make money.
They make tremendous amounts of money doing this. So I would like to see, the only way we're going to survive as a species in this era of weapons of mass destruction, with thousands of nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert that can be launched and reach their targets in 45 minutes, the only way we're going to survive is if we figure out how to get rid of these weapons, and even how to get rid of things like small arms that are the cause of so much
How
death
about
and destruction
drones?
worldwide. And that drones are a huge problem, and the fact that they're not regulated in this country, and I'm afraid that someday, if they haven't already, the terrorists will figure out a way to get back at us for our drone strikes, which often will hit weddings and other celebrations and kill innocent people. So,
will America be visited by a major war on its soil, as other countries around the world have experienced? Is that in the future of America?
I hope not. I'd like to see an end to all wars. I'd like to see us all recognize, going back to that picture of that pale blue dot, that this is all we've got, and we need to figure this out. And we the people need to rise up and tell our leaders enough is enough.
Are you a
All we
revolutionary?
really want to do is we want to enjoy time with our families. We want to be in nature. We want to go to the beach and swim. We want to hike through the mountains. We want to fall in love. We want to love our children. We want to see them go to their school plays and dance on stage. We want to grow old and happy and sit on the porch drinking a mint julep and then die in our sleep. And everything else is a distraction from that.
Are you advocating underneath revolution
Yes.
to turn over the system?
Yes. I'm not advocating armed revolution,
Yeah.
but I am advocating revolution, certainly.
You're going to be on a lot of lists in Washington. I can see that in the future.
You know, my goal, I saw a book in the library last year. It was 100 academics that are ruining America, and it was written by some right-wing think tank. And I wasn't in there, and I was really disappointed. So my goal is to make it in the next edition.
World hunger. We've only got a couple of minutes left. We can cover a couple of more topics. What about world hunger? There's too much hunger in the world.
It is. It's appalling.
Do we need to have that amount of hunger in the world today?
No, we don't, especially in light of the fact that we waste 40% of the food that we grow and comes to our tables in this country. And instead of trying to work with local farmers to grow crops for human consumption, we've encouraged, through multinational corporations, them to grow export crops to be sent to the developed world. We've stated that the fix for world hunger is technology, such as genetically modified crops. And there has not been a single genetically modified crop brought to market that in any way provides more drought resistance, flood resistance, heat resistance, faster growth than the way we farmed for millennia.
Do we need to have famine in the world today? Famine.
No, we don't. There's enough food already to feed the planet. And why is it that so much money is spent on farm subsidies for the wrong reason and to pay farmers to actually not grow crops? It just
mind-boggling.
If you were an alien coming here from somewhere else and you looked at us, or even if you were an adult and you looked at how we act with each other and you had come to a preschool, you'd say, boy, who's in charge here? These toddlers need to get it together. There's going to be mayhem before nap time. And we're all acting like toddlers.
So we talked about so many things, and it seems like the systems of government are important to consider and look at. And which systems of government, generally speaking, are more encouraging to the survival and happiness of human beings? We're talking about there's capitalism, socialism, and communism, and various versions of those, but superseding that, there's a need for certain people to be dictators or kings and those sorts of things. Which system of government would seem to be the most optimum system of government to have the population be more contented than others?
I think ones that have done this somewhat well are the Northern European nations, which are much more egalitarian and spend their larger amount of tax money on social service programs, and there is much greater equality between rich and poor, and yet they are very homogeneous societies. And it's not clear how well they have done or will do with an influx of poor immigrants. I don't think there's really a system that's gotten it right so far, because unfortunately every system has devolved into one where it's the few rich and powerful who take over. I would like to see a true democracy where everyone has an equal voice, and I'd like to see an economic system that was somewhat akin to Paracon or participatory economics, where it was a ground up level approach to the economy that looked at human needs and allowed people to contribute what they could and receive what they needed, and that didn't rely on the profit motive. I'm just going to say one last thing about this.
Sure.
In medicine, my field, it's so often stated by the pharmaceutical companies that if there weren't the incentives to create drugs, that we wouldn't have the choice of drugs that we do to treat medical conditions. And unfortunately, the vast majority of drugs that are produced this day are just Me Too drugs that are minor chemical modifications of pre-existing agents that offer no added therapeutic value, because that's where the money is.
The AMA is coming after you. I can just see it now.
I'm not a member, but so I'm not concerned. But really, are you kidding me that if there was no financial incentive and that there was a true funding of research by the populace, we could focus on things like malaria and other neglected diseases worldwide, and HIV and leishmaniasis and schistosomiasis? You can't tell me that there's enough scientists that just on the basis of curiosity and wanting to be the first to make that discovery are going to work as hard as they can to come up with cures for that, because they have a driving desire to learn and to find out about things and to discover what the world offers, but because they want to help people. It's not about money.
There's only a few Jonas Salks around, and those kinds of people where they don't want to patent on this miracle drug or cure for a disease. There's only been a few of them. We can't wait anymore for the roll of the genetic dice to produce a few characters like that to make our lives better.
Well, the system's set up that you can't. You sign contracts with your university or with the company that you're working with, and unfortunately the nature of science education in this country today is abysmal, and there's so much pseudoscientific and magical thinking, and I think that it prevents us from having the kind of scientific enterprise in the U.S. that you're seeing the rest of the world develop and move ahead of us on.
And we're going to have to stop now before they yell at me. I want you to look at the camera and have some final thoughts or comments about.
Did you receive a tweet?
I haven't. I don't know. And say a few words to the viewers about what happened tonight and what's going on. A final message.
My message is we need to create peace, and we need to care for our planet. I guess I'll make a message that's somewhat self-serving. I have a website, publichealthandsocialjustice.org or phsj.org. It's a labor of love for me. I receive no money to do this. I spend a dozen hours each week updating the 150 plus PowerPoints that are on the website that are all completely open access and cover a range of ideas, be it war and peace, women's health, environmental health, food safety and food justice, the criminal justice system. Please go there, use all or parts of the slideshows with appropriate citation. Again, there is no sponsorship to this site and I make no money doing it, but I'd like to get the information out there. That being said, go home, hug somebody you love, find someone else to love, spread the love, make this world a place that we can all be proud of so that on our deathbed we can say, yeah, things are going to be okay for our kids.
Wow. What a closing comment. I wish I had said that. But anyhow, I guess it's time for us to wind down and say goodnight. Am I going to say good night to my viewers out there? I got to tell you about the ACLU. Our civil liberties are in jeopardy. Join the ACLU and protect our civil liberties, particularly with, okay, you got to end corporate personhood so that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. And we want to tell you about what else. Oh, thanks for watching. Thanks again. Remember KFC, always KFC, and not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Dr. Don's KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Good night.